Welcome to today's Strategic Source Profit Improvement Webinar Series event. Today's topic is Revving Up Savings, Debt and Treasury Opportunities, and our featured guest supplier with that is Driveline Automotive Advisors. We'll have Chuck Pappas, our VP of Operations, kicking things off in just a moment. Chuck, activate your webcam, and we can turn things over to you.
Well, welcome everybody, and we're glad that you're joining us today. And thank you for registering for our Profit Improvement webinar. This afternoon, we're pleased to present Brian Marshall and Scott Noggle from Driveline Automotive Advisor. As it pertains to your dealership, Brian and Scott will address how Driveline Automotive Advisors can position you to reduce your interest expense and treasury fees, secure a bank partner, and improve your cash yields. We'll bring Brian and Scott on in just a minute. We have this slide up right now, and if you scan our QR code and give us your information, we'll be glad to get you a copy of this webinar. We'll send it to you right away, as we should get it up and loaded by the end of today or tomorrow, so you won't have to wait for it. But I'm sure that Scott and Brian will be able to answer any questions you may have as we go along in this webinar. So before we go, I'd just like to say that we started this webinar series about 3 years ago. In the course of these webinars, we presented on a number of topics, including various expense categories, audit recovery, DMS, marketing analysis of your buyers, aircraft financing, revenue-producing opportunities, and our popular buy-sell webinars, all intended to reduce expenses and improve your profitability. If you are new to these series, we encourage you to stay tuned and watch for more profit improvement topics. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian and Scott. Brian, Scott, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you to our friends at Strategic Source, Chuck and Doug, for this wonderful opportunity to speak to our dealership brethren. We think we have a very timely and informative presentation for you today called Revving Up Savings, Debt and Treasury Opportunities. On the surface, it may sound like a dry area to talk about, but believe me when I say this, there are a lot of opportunities in this space. So we'll get right into it. What you will learn today. We're educators. Brian and I definitely pride ourselves in teaching our clients, even our non-clients, about some things in automotive. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about some of these topics today. How do we reduce interest expense? How do we get loose in those covenants? Covenants are not the friendliest things. They're intimidating, but believe me, there's ways to loosen covenants to the benefit of the dealership. Eliminate personal guarantees. There's not an owner of a dealership alive who would say, I love those personal guarantees, bring me more. No, we want to get rid of them if we can. We do in many cases, not all cases, but there is a possibility we can eliminate personal guarantees. Little known out there in looking at clients and in my corporate experience, and that is increasing free cash yields. In any investment portfolio, typically the lowest yielding item or investment is cash. But even within the cash allocation, there are lower yields and higher yields in that space. And we'll go over that in detail. Reduce treasury management fees. Those things can get onerous if you're not keeping your eyes on them. What are treasury management fees? Every month, your DDA bank, your depository bank will send you an invoice. And sometimes those invoices can be 30 pages long per dealership, depending on your activity and number of bank accounts. And there's some fees in there that we believe we can help you out with and reduce those costs. So we'll go to our next slide. And this brings us to our first polling question. So we're curious to see who our participants are today. So we'll give a couple of times. I know in the past we would expect that, we would have some finance people on like listening into our presentation, but very interested to see who our attendees are today. So we'll give a little bit more time. Looks like so far we got a nice cross mix of attendees. Give it a few more seconds and we can chop it off there. So yeah, just as expected, there's no others, so that's good to hear, but we do have a nice cross mix between the dealer principals, management, outside vendors, and our friends at Strategic Source. So we will then proceed to the next slide. So in the way of introduction, again, I'm Scott Noggle, my colleague's Brian Marshall. We're co-founders of Driveline Automotive Advisors. While we are advisors in the debt area and treasury management area, we do other items, and we do buy sells. We also do a lot of advising with risk management programs, health insurance, the F&I space, setting up reinsurance companies, DOWCs, and what have you. In the buy-sell area, we do dealerships. That's the obvious one. But one of our listings right now happens to be at an F&I agency as well. So we do touch all the bases. Brian and I have a lot of experience. I just entered my 30th year in automotive come on Valentine's Day 2024. I've been very, very fortunate enough to work for three of the largest dealership groups in the United States: Holman Automotive, DCH Automotive ahead of its sale to Lithia, and Capstone Automotive, which is a private equity-backed roll-up consolidation. Learned a lot along my journey, and I believe at this point it was time for me to say, let me get out of the corporate world, let me get in the consulting world. When you're working for a dealership group, you're benefiting basically them, but I think in the consulting world, there's a lot of satisfaction helping out the whole entire dealership brethren to the extent that you can. So I'll let Brian introduce himself. Brian?
Thanks, Scott. So my name's Brian Marshall. I'm a CPA, like Scott. We've been working together since probably, I think for the last 10 years, basically,
Yep.
since 2014. Like Scott, I was in Capstone Automotive Group, the private equity roll-up. I also worked for Prime Automotive Group. And way back, about 15 years ago, my first client was just a small used car dealership, single point dealership. So I've pretty much run the gamut from as small as you could get to one of the largest privately owned groups in the country. And we basically, just to add on to what Scott said, we decided to bring what we've learned over our careers to the benefit of individual dealers directly, and help them increase their cash flows and reduce expenses.
Thank you, Brian. So what do we solve? We know there's problems out there, and our clients bring us their problems, and we love that because we are, in my mind, very good problem solvers. So what are those problems? Paying too much for debt and treasury services. I know along my journey, whether it was in the corporate world, with the different dealership groups I work for, and in the consulting world, there hasn't been a dealership or a client where I haven't found that they're paying too much for something. Typically, it's actually the debt itself. And when we say debt in this presentation, I'm not confining this to floor plan. I'm also talking about acquisition debt, mortgages, working capital, and equipment type financings. But also in the treasury services, again, they're the fees that the bank charges you basically for using them as your depository bank. So we certainly, it will solve that problem, and we have done that successfully. In my career, I've been doing that for about 25, 30 years, solving that problem. One of the things we know with our clients is they're just not aware of what current market and competition is. That's mostly because they haven't tested the markets for a while. And there's a lot of reasons why they haven't tested the market. But what I found through my journey, being a guy that's been in the business a long time, is that the banks have perceived better their dealership credits, because we survived the financial crisis of 08-09. We survived, the Great Recession. We survived COVID. Dealerships are an excellent credit for banks. We have strong balance sheets. We have strong cash flow, and we have a recession resilient model because we have multiple sources of revenue. New car, used cars, parts, service, F&I, and in some cases, we also have body shops. So that's a good credit. And because you have a good credit equals lower interest rates. Because we are such a coveted credit and a customer, there's a lot of competition for our business. And when there's a lot of competition, you tend to find that banks like to compete with each other, and that only benefits our clients with lower pricing. Another problem we solve, our engagements on a debt refi could take around 60 to 90 days, okay? Brian and I take pride in doing this for full marketing because we want to know how the banks will bid competitively on our clients. So we do a pitch book, and Brian will get you into the steps later. But that takes time. So, if you think about it, 60 to 90 days, how do you have someone at a dealership spend 60 to 90 days on something, knowing that they already are doing something at the dealership, probably working full-time and then some? Brian and I have experience. Obviously, I've been to positions, everything from internal audit, corporate controller, all the way to CFO. And I know from experience that we have other things to do. I like to equate the resources and the time thing to a dealership, selling a dealership. You hire a broker and he does his work. He tells you his results and you say yay, nay, and let's do it. It's sort of the same thing here. It's an added workload, and we can obviously alleviate that as any good consultant should. Shallow connections in the market. Because Brian and I have been in this business for so long, we've established connections with basically just every single floor planning bank in automotive. But not only that, we've established contacts with the OEMs and their OEM captives. We'll get into the discussion about the banks, the competition, the OEM captives a little bit later. But these are the problems we solve. We are an outsourced turnkey operation that works for the dealer. To be clear, we do not work for the banks. We only work for our dealership clients. So on that, we'll go to poll number 2. Brian, this is always an interesting question. Brian, I think you would agree. When was the last time you reviewed your debt portfolio pricing spreads? Brian, in your experience, what have you seen in this?
In my experience, I've seen a lot of dealers have stable long-term relationships with their banks. And so then the spreads are just like, it is what it is. And, there's just an acknowledgement that that's what they are. And very infrequent competitive review of the pricing there.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's an interesting thing. I think most respondents, when I ask this question, is I can't even remember when was the last time. That's
the majority of the responses that we're getting. Can't remember. Yeah, and 2 to 5 years being the other one.
Yeah, and not surprising at all. I mean, less than a year, I would actually high five you and give you a trophy if someone tests their pricing every single year. But like in any cost situation, you need to have a regimented way to look at it, whether you do it yourself or you outsource it. So. Happy to see that, the attendees, and here you go. You're right, Brian. I'm going to show the results. Most people said, I can't remember in 2 to 5 years. So not too surprising with the responses. So, all right. I think we're ready for our next slide. Give me a second here. Okay. One of the things I think is always interesting in a presentation, rather than talk notionally, what do you do? What do you have, is actually to put real life examples to it. So, I probably could have put a third analysis in here too about savings or opportunity, and I'll just speak to that real quick. And I mentioned it before, was cash yields. Making sure that your cash works for you. Little known to a lot of dealerships that the cash on their balance sheet's probably earning less than 1%. I think we all agree that there's better investment opportunities out there. So, and we can talk about that, whether you sweep your cash, whether you concentrate your cash, where you have cash offset accounts, or you even have overnight investments. I can assure you that's better than just keeping cash on your balance sheet and let the bank dictate what their interest rate paid on that cash could be. And for some dealerships, that is multi-million dollars, right? So be aware of that. But as you would expect, when we do our debt refi gigs, most of the savings is typically found in, let's just reduce the spreads, right, on the debt. I wish Brian and I could say we can control the markets. We control Prime and SOFRs and BSBY, and in the old days, LIBOR, before they were replaced by BSBY and SOFRs as commercial indices. But we can control the spreads. That's what we do. So in this example, we were asked to do not only, find better rates or spreads in the debt portfolio. We did loosen their covenants, and we also got better cash yields for them. But in this little snapshot, you can see we've refinanced not only their floor plan debt, but also their working capital, their real estate, their furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and their blue sky or acquisition financing. Fairly large dealership group. The debt portfolio approached $200 million. That savings, and this is annual savings, not just 1 year savings. This will be go on and continue, was $809,000. When I did add the other items that we looked at, we pushed their annual savings to about $1.2 million. So it can be done, and we'll get into it a little bit later, some of our other success stories. But for suffice it is to say at this point, that's where we find a lot of savings. Loosening covenants is that one like archaic, Scott. What are you talking about? Loosening covenants, and how does that save me money? Well, banks want you to keep cash on your balance sheet. That's their best collateral. It's liquid. They can grab it quite easily. But our job is to make sure that they are not overly strict, and then we can loosen them a little bit. The common covenants that we see are the current ratio, tangible net worth, debt to equity. They're almost kind of like disguised ways to tell the dealer, we need more cash on your balance sheet. So we look to loosen those covenants. And then by doing so, in this live example, through a covenant negotiation, we freed up $1 million where the owner could immediately take $1 million off the balance sheet and do whatever he wants with it. In my world, the best investment, and we're all dealership people on this call with most of the attendees, is to use it to buy another dealership. And it's not unusual to get a 25% return with leverage on your money. You can put it in the stock market. Historical average for the S&P 500 is about 10%. And then you can see some other longer term averages for 10-year treasuries and money market. The whole point is, let's get some cash out of the business when we can. If it's not used efficiently or optimally in the dealership, let's find a better home for that cash. That comes with loosening covenants. So I'll advance to the next slide, and I'm going to turn this over to Brian, and Brian's going to reiterate some of the stuff I said, but he's going to go talk about and call our process wheel about how we do it. So Brian, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So here you see, again, we're just reiterating the problems that we solve. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Scott's gone over them several times, but basically reducing interest expense, the treasury management fees, and really we could have swapped the order there of bullet point 3 and 4. So by loosening up the restrictive covenants and personal guarantees, that frees up cash that can then be put to better use than just sitting on the balance sheet. That's how we increase the cash investment yield. So what does working with us look like? It's basically a 6-step process. So you'll see here in the following slides, we'll just get into a little bit more data. So I'm just going to quickly go over them here. First step is we're collecting data from the dealership. Then we run it through our internal processes to benchmark, what your dealership looks like compared to other dealerships that have similar profiles or in similar geographies, similar brand mixes, et cetera, so that we can really determine, is there an opportunity? Can we help you out? We're not trying to get into an engagement if we don't think that we can help you out. So we get back to you and say, hey, this is what we see in the market. This is where you're at. After that, if you decide to work with us, we prepare, like Scott briefly mentioned, the marketing package. And that is to sell your dealership and your organization to various banks that may or may not be familiar with you. So they need to get comfortable with you so that they can know that that their risk is appropriate, and that's going to let them offer more competitive rates. We then do step 4 is a full marketing. So just a side note here, I've been working with Strategic Source for approximately the past 6 years. Anyone that's worked with Strategic Source knows it's all about getting a competitive quote process. That the way that you achieve your maximum savings is you put the information out to a group of trusted vendors, and you basically let them fight it out amongst themselves. Who wants your business, badly enough that they're going to give you the best offer? That's the same basic philosophy that we have at Driveline Automotive, and we use that full marketing process to get the best results for you. Then we get the presentation we get the results back and make a presentation to the dealer of the results, our recommended path forward, and we engage in any additional negotiations that might be relevant at that point. And finally, we go to the closing and implementation. So if you do decide to switch banks, we'll help walk you through that process and be there to help your internal team so that we're with you from the very start to the very end when the bank is wiring into your account or taking out the old floor plan provider or what have you. And I believe, Scott, you still have control. If we can go to the next slide.
I do. I just wanted to add one more thing about part 6 on the wheel. One of the things that I like to do too is even after you close and monies are wired, I do want to look at your new invoices just to make sure that that the negotiated pricing is in place. And then obviously we can help you out on that too. And then we're always there for phone calls. Let's cut to the chase. This is a partner relationship. While there is transactional stuff involved with our clients, we like to think it's a partnership. So you would never feel hesitant to call us. So, okay. So Brian.
Yep. So now we're just going to, go over a little bit more detail on each point. So the first step, data collection, especially if you're in a dealership with, or in a group with multiple rooftops, it could be a lot of paperwork, and our goal is to make it as easy and pain-free as possible. So the data collection step is pretty light. It's sending your most recent debt statements, floor plan, mortgage, working capital lines, whatever debt sources you have, just whatever your most recent statements are. Probably you're all reconciling that anyway, so you have that easily to hand, plus your most recent manufacturer financial statements. So a pretty easy lift. We're not doing an audit. We're not needing to come in and get all kinds of sample transactions or anything. It's just your most recent statements that will have all the information that we need. After we get that information, like I touched on, we do our benchmarking. So we are looking at your rates, your spreads, your utilization of credit to compare that to what your competitors are getting, what other banks are offering in the market. We're comparing those against national banks, regional banks, OEM, captive banks. And again, the whole purpose here is so that we can let you know, hey, what does it look like? Are you at market? Are you below market? Are you above market? And we can definitely save you here on the floor plan interest, the mortgage, the covenants, and the treasury management fees. Again, that's a frequently overlooked area in this field. And we get that back to you, and then you decide, whether you want to move forward with us or not. So then if you decide to go forward, well, okay, before we move on to the next slide, looks like we have our polling question. We can go back to the polling question.
I got a little antsy there. So yeah, poll 3, when was the last time you replaced a bank or added a new financing source?
So this is separate. The prior polling question was, when was the last time you reviewed your spreads? This is more, when did you actually change or add a bank?
My guess, Brian, is we're going to see I cannot remember will be the most popular response. What we find out, there's hesitancy sometimes for change. And by the way, when we do these processes, it's not a given that the bank will find a new bank or banks during the process. But I will say that 1/3 of the time we stay with the incumbent bank, and 2/3 of the time we find that that there is a change to another bank or banks. And again, when we say banks, it may not necessarily be the national banks or the regional banks. Some of that change could be a combination of banks, including the OEM captives. I always like to take this opportunity at this point to say that sometimes the OEM captives do have good programs, even for my bigger clients, while the vast majority of the numbers might be, or the financings might be with the national banks or a regional bank or super regional bank. The captives can slip in there with some competitive programs at the point. So, all right, so we're looking at the results.
Yeah, and I can just share the results. So the majority are in the I cannot remember, time frame, with the rest being in 2 to 5 years. And look, that makes sense. It's disruptive to the organization to change. Usually you have a very good relationship with the banker. But it just highlights the opportunity. If you've been with the same vendor essentially for years, chances are that your conditions have changed and market conditions have changed, and they're probably just carrying on with offering you similar results that they always have been. And that's where we can come in by doing this competitive process. That's where we find the juice.
That's right.
Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Guys, this is Doug. Can I make
Sure.
a comment here?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Doug,
It was interesting. I think Scott, you said that, or Brian, that 33% of the time the dealers stay with their incumbent and they change 2/3 or 66. Is that correct?
Yep. Correct.
That's almost the reverse of what we see on other services and supplies. So our experience is that usually 30% of the time a dealer is willing to make a change, and 70% of the time they want to stay with their incumbent. So that's encouraging that you're getting that kind of response. The last thing I would say is that one of the presidents that I have a lot of respect for, Ronald Reagan, said many years ago, "Trust but verify,"
Trust
and
but verify.
that's a good.
Doug, you don't know how many times Brian have said that in our lifetimes as CPAs, right?
Yep.
You know, so well, now let me give you a little bit more color behind that. By the way, the 2/3, 1/3. The 2/3, I think, is more because a lot of our clients may have believed that their OEMs was the best, the best choice, right? And they've been with them for 15, 20 years, 30 years, okay? And I know this is going against what I said before, where sometimes don't forget your OEM, captives. I will also say part of that 2/3 is because maybe the bank has been with a regional bank and maybe not a national bank, and perhaps, they're through growth, strengthening of the balance sheet, et cetera, that they're not getting market pricing, So sometimes the regional banks and the smaller banks, when a dealership gets big, it's really just not their place, unfortunately, for them to handle that size credit. And then the captives is another one too. Sometimes captives, just so you know, will not only finance their own brand, but they'll finance other brands too. Some people may not realize that, but I think sometimes when you put it out to market, most of our success stories is to those respondents that said, "I can't remember the last time I looked at it. I can't remember the last time I changed the bank," right? So just adding a little bit more commentary to that. So we'll go on to the next slide, Brian.
Sure.
Yeah.
So after we've done the benchmarking and determined that there is an opportunity, this is when we put together, like Scott mentioned, it's essentially a pitch book, almost exactly like we would use to sell the dealership. And that might seem like overkill. Why do you go and put this whole thing together when you're just basically calling the banks and asking them to reduce the rates? And the thing is, if we're doing a full competitive quoting process, there's inevitably going to be banks in there that you haven't worked with or that really don't know your dealership at all. So it really helps them get a full picture of the dealership, the risk profile, the fact that you're going to be a good steward of their money, their credit, and that they can count on you to, pay that back timely, not violate, their covenants. And also it saves them work. When the banker, the relationship manager takes it to underwriting, he can flip this, professional package over. It just makes the whole process easier and really assists us in getting a good result for the dealer. So then after we have your sign off on the marketing package, we do our full marketing. So we're going to shop it around to 5 to 10 competitive banks that we've identified. Could be a national, could be a captive, could be a regional bank for your needs. And we basically have them get into a bidding war. And it's not a bid. I know Doug Austin and the strategic source guys have drilled that into me. A bid implies that you're bound to the lowest guy. That's not the case. It's a competitive quoting process, but they know that it's a competitive process. They know they're competing with these other banks, and all these bankers have their bonus targets to make. They want to sign new business. So the more we put it out for this competitive process, the better results we're going to get. That takes us to the next step, which is actually a polling question. So what debt finance source do you currently use? Are you with National Bank, like Chase, Bank of America, a regional bank, or an OEM captive finance company, or are you using a combination of the above? If you're at, like let's say if you're in a multi rooftop group, you might have different solutions for different stores.
Yeah, I think our response is probably going to be based on the audience demographic. If they're a large group or a smaller group, 1 rooftop, 10 rooftops will probably drive the question here too. I will say for our larger credits, although Brian spoke to earlier about a 2 rooftop credit that we had, we did flip them from an OEM to a national bank, even a 2 rooftop. Some of the national banks will only take credits over a certain dollar amount, but I would say that in my experience that some national banks will take the 1 rooftops as well. So,
right. So it's looking like a mix. I can just tell you the responses we have in so far. It's really a mix of everything. The biggest selection so far is combination of the above.
Yeah.
So, and that basically fits, with what we've seen in our experience. And just to get back on that, maybe I'll cover that on the next bullet point. Actually,
just one more comment. One of the responses was non-responses. Nobody in the poll said national banks, right?
Only, national bank only.
Yeah, what's that, Brian?
National bank only. I'm assuming that there's a national bank if they're using a combination.
But I would say for my larger credits, they would have responded national bank only before we got to them, right? So and so I thought that was interesting. That to me tells me of the respondents, whoever there may be some opportunity. Is what I would conclude looking at those poll results.
And I would say, Scott, you can chime in if you think I'm wrong, but I would say in general, the OEM captive finance companies are going to have your higher spreads.
Yeah.
Regional banks are going to be less, and the national banks are going to be the cheapest, just due to their scale.
That's right. I will just add, just to give full transparency and consult here is, sometimes the OEMs are a little bit looser on their covenants, requirements, right. Especially in the floor plan space. So, all right, so we'll go to our next slide.
So then we get to after we go through that marketing process. So again, we've selected 5 to 10 banks. We've sent the pitch book, any follow-up information out to them. There's a certain period of time. They get their results back to us, and we compile those for you and present a report to you with, column by column. Here's all the banks that responded. Here's your current. Here's the savings estimate. Any of you that are working with Strategic Source already, you're going to be familiar with that. That's how Strategic Source presents their findings back to you with the estimated savings so that the dealer can see. This is, I started to get into this before with that 2 rooftop location. It was 2 relatively small dealerships and a mortgage, and they were one of these that was with a captive. They were with a captive for the floor plan, and I believe they had regional banks for their mortgage. And just that 2 dealership group, we saved them, around $300,000 a year in floor plan and another $200,000 to $250,000 in interest on their mortgage. So if you're even, you don't have to be somebody with 20 rooftops swinging that kind of a volume at a bank to get a fantastic result. Even a 2-location dealership group can see significant savings from going through this competitive process. And that was the same thing, like we've said. They had been with that captive for a long time. They didn't have the time or the resources to really do a competitive process. And so we were able to save them a significant amount of money by going through this process. As part of the presentation of the results, we will go back, and it's not like, hey, we just turn it over to you. This is the initial results, choose A, B, or C. If you say, hey, well, I really want to stay with my incumbent bank, but, Bank C gave us a better deal on this particular area, we'll go back and negotiate those points with you. Our goal is not to swing it in any kind of predetermined way. It's to get the dealer happy with the relationship, the rates, and we also are trying to get you into a partnership. If you're in growth mode, we, are going to want to match you with a bank that's going to be a partner in your expansion so that they can grow with you as you grow. So those are all the things that we're doing there when we present the results and help you navigate through the selection process. What does it mean if these covenants free up? What do these ratios mean? You got to think with, does this bank maybe have lower interest rates, but they're going to require reviewed financial statements, which you've never done before? How much is that going to cost? So we'll help you through all that. And then finally, it's on to the closing and implementation. Like I mentioned before, a lot of legal paperwork with banks. We'll work with your in-house counsel or your external counsel, your existing CPA firm, and go back and forth, shepherding all the documents to the finish line, helping schedule if you are going to, change banks, scheduling the takeout on the floor plan, scheduling the switchover of the mortgages and all the other financing agreements you have. So it's really a turnkey solution. We take you right from the initial data collection all the way through to it's done, it's implemented, and like Scott said, we can do the post-implementation audit as well to make sure that there was nothing lost in translation. If they said that their fees were going to be X, we audit them to make sure they come in at X and not Y after the implementation. And I think we can go on to the next one there.
Imagine that, Brian, another poll.
They seem to be coming up frequently here. So polling question number 5, are you willing to use another bank finance source? So, curious to see the results on this. And I know that the relationship, can be close, but, a lot of times when dealers see the volume of the dollars, they realize that they can probably develop a close relationship with a new banker as well. So far the results, nobody has selected, no, my bank is awesome. So it's the majority is coming in at sure. I simply want fair and market pricing. With some saying depends, show me why I should change. And that's understandable. It could be a big upheaval to swap out the floor plan, or change your bank accounts or what have you. But typically, look, we're going to get you to a better result. If it's staying with the best bank and that makes the most sense for you, then that's what you're going to get. And if the market pricing is just so compelling that it drives you to actually choose switching banks, then that's going to be your call. And that's what we want to get to, is something that you're happy with and that increases your cash flow. Now, next, Scott, unless you have anything to add there, Scott.
I do not. Why don't we go through this, and then I know we're going to have a Q&A session. We certainly want to let the audience take control a little bit.
Right. So this is our assessment offer. So basically, the first 2 points in our process wheel, the data collection and the benchmarking, we do for free. No cost, no obligation. Our contact information is going to be one of the later slides. You get in contact with us, schedule an appointment. We can then give you the data requests that we need, and we'll do the no obligation assessment and tell you we can either help you or we can't. And then it will be up to you. If we can show you that in our best efforts, based on our industry knowledge and experience, we can save you money and help get your dealership into a better space, we're happy to share those results with you, and then we can determine if it makes sense for you to engage us to help you through this process.
Yeah, and this, just to add on, Brian, this is largely just what we call a photocopying exercise, where you're just literally just sending us your bank statements, you're sending us your monthly debt statements, your treasury management, your agreements, and maybe some OEM statements. It just allows us to do a proper and free initial assessment, and we can turn that around real quick as well. We got our math models. You got 2 geeky math guys on the phone that likes Excel. We can pump the numbers pretty quickly to see if it makes sense for you. The other thing I want to emphasize, if it hasn't been emphasized, is this is a very turnkey operation. Our goal is to make this as simple as possible for everybody. So we'll go through that through the process. We want to make this as turnkey as possible. That's the whole point. So we'll get off of this slide. I think we may have some Q&A. And here we go. Okay. Brian, let's look at, I don't know if we have any, all right, no Q&A questions in. So when we do these presentations and we pitch this and talk about it with our clients, we know that these are probably the more popular questions that come up. So
Right.
Brian, why don't you get us started? And I do see some Q&A coming in too that we'll get to. So
Sure. So in what areas do you find savings? So again, I don't need to beat a dead horse. We've probably said it 6 or 10 times in this presentation. It's anything having to do with your debt and treasury. So that, from the treasury management fees, floor plan interest, mortgage interest, working capital lines, acquisition lines, even FF&E lines. If you have a line of credit to help you make a furniture, fixture, and equipment purchase, we can deal with those as well. That's for these specific engagements.
yeah,
Scott, anything else you want to add on that?
Sure. I'll take the second question. So how much can I save? Again, it's going to be dependent on the size, the scope, and the complexities of your debt portfolio and your treasury management function. But I would say that the more debt out there, obviously, the higher dollar savings. In real life, Brian had mentioned one, and I mentioned another one already in our presentation. But I would say over the last year, on about 7 or 8 engagements, we saved anywhere between $300,000 a year up to about $1.2 million. We do have 2 engagements that are actually over $1 million a year in savings. So it can vary, but it's interesting. You're never going to see an answer, we didn't save any money, because during our assessment period, right, we would say that and not even do the engagement, right? It would be that you're fine, right? So that there are the ranges. Brian, I'll let you answer bullet point 3, and then I'll get to 4.
Sure. So, it could be either, hey, the dealer principal controls these relationships, or the controller or the CFO is already on top of it. Why do we need an external consultant to come in? And, it really just goes down to a couple of factors. One is the factor of time. If you're anything like the controller or the CFO that I've seen, if you're the controller, at least half of your month is wrapped up in wrapping up the month, closing out the books, making sure the bills get paid, and delivering the manufacturer financials. You guys are already working long hours in that, the first week to 10 days or so after the end of the month to get that done. So it really would just make it take a long time if you only have, 1 to 2 weeks really during the month that you can focus on this. If you're the CFO, you're probably dealing with auditors, you're dealing with doing financial reporting with the owner, strategizing things to do. So again, it's just a question of time. Scott and I can do this full time, so we can get it done in a quicker and more expeditious fashion. And 2, unless you're doing this all the time, and we saw from our polling questions, most people are not reviewing this every year. Most people are not looking at switching their banks very frequently. Scott and I are in the business of doing this. Scott's been doing it for 30 years. I've been doing it for 15. We have a broad range of connections that allow us to get a pretty good picture of what the market rates are. If you're just handling this on your own, the most likely path is you're going to your existing banker. You're saying, hey, is there anything you can do for me? He's maybe giving you, a little bone, but he's not going to give you the same results as if he knows, oh, I'm now competing with, 5 or 10 other banks on this. That's what Scott and I bring to the table. So it's off your plate. You don't have to worry about it. We're running that competitive process. We can be the bad guy, so you don't have to, face up to your existing banker and say, hey, you need to squeeze your rates down. We'll be the bad guy on that. And we can tell who's at market, who's above market, who's under market, who's really giving you the best deal. Anything else on that, Scott?
No. Well said, Brian. Well said. The 4th bullet point is, and I see we have a question that we'll get to, how long does the process take? The process we said earlier, It's typically 60 to 90 days, depends on a number of factors. It's always going to be a little bit longer if there's a mortgage involved because of the appraisals. We also have to worry about surveys and what have you. Sometimes you can't go faster than some of the third parties, but typically it's 60 to 90 days. I've done it in less than 30 days, and as I said earlier, I did one in 3 days, and there were some special circumstances behind that one, but it can get done pretty quickly. So that's our timing. Brian, I see we have a couple of questions, but the question that someone asked, and I think it's a very good question, is how do you get paid, right? The way I like to answer that, is it's going to be paid by your savings, right? We like to think that these are found savings for the dealership group, and our fees is highly dependent on what we think we can save you. Okay, we typically look to take a percentage of first year savings, right? And we usually cap it when we think it's fair and equitable to both of us, you know? So my example is if we refinance $1 billion debt and we take 50% of first year savings and first year savings $10 million, we're not going to charge you $10 million, right? Or $5 million, right? We're going to come up with something that we think is fair and equitable and consistent with the time and energy spent on the engagement. So, Brian, do you see any other questions? Hey, real quick, Brian, before you respond, our friends at Strategic Source, are we okay on time? I want to be respectful of everybody's time here.
Yeah, this is Doug. I think we're almost at the end, but I've got a couple of questions for you too, if you guys don't mind.
Doug. Yeah,
Scott, earlier in the presentation, you made reference to DOWC, and I've seen activity with some of our other CPA friends on that. Can you expand on that? Just identify what that is.
Yeah. So for a lot of dealerships are in the F&I arena are taking advantage of what we call reinsurance. Okay, and in layman terms, reinsurance is that when the underlying contract, whether it's a service contract, a vehicle service contract, tire and wheel, gap, the insurance company in the old days, 30 years ago, got all that profit, and to the extent that premiums exceeded claims. Okay, so long story short, this allowed someone cracked the code on that and said, you know what, the dealer should get a piece of that, right? Underwriting profit and some investment income. There's a few structures out there that some of the attendees may have heard of. One is a CFC or controlled foreign corp. One is an NCFC, which is a non-controlled foreign corp. The other one is a DOWC, which is probably the newest kid on the block, which stands for a dealer-owned warranty company. These are complex issues, and this is why a lot of people like to hire the Bryans and the Scott Nogles of the world to help them navigate those waters and explain it in layman terms, but also negotiate it. There's a lot of hidden fees when you do these services that the provider and the F&I agencies charge. And Brian and I, again, just like the banks, we know what the market is, for those costs, It goes well beyond just the numbers. There's things about training and all that type of stuff. But the DOWC, to be clear, to answer your question, Doug, is another structure in the reinsurance world for our dealer.
Okay. So I appreciate that, Scott. The other couple of questions I have, every dealer out here works with a CPA firm, and there are multitudes of CPA firms. Aren't they normally recommending that the dealership take this financing and treasury out to quote?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have had CPAs refer us business and say, Scott, can you help me out on that? There are a lot of dealers out there and that's a good point, Doug. I'm glad you brought this up because I think Brian and I didn't even think it through this way. But a lot of dealerships, particularly if they don't have a CFO, will rely on their CPA, and there's nothing wrong with that too. But we do get referrals from CPAs and lawyers, for that matter, right? And sometimes even financial advisors will actually refer business over to us. Brian, I don't know if in your career you've seen that, but I've certainly seen that in my world.
Yeah, although I think it's less. I mean, the CPAs are not really taking ownership of the whole dealership finances, has been my point. So
it's much less. Yeah.
Not typically a service they perform. But yeah, Scott's right. We would get referrals on that.
Yeah. And what I was getting at there is I don't think a CPA would run the business, but I think sometimes a dealer's inclination might be to call their CPA to see if this type of service that Brian and I offer has validity to it, So, yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm getting at is a lot of dealers use their CPA as their personal financial advisor, confidant sometimes, especially for the smaller groups. So that's how I would answer that.
My last question, you mentioned that you had savings of, I think it was 300 to well over $1 million. What does that look like as a percent? What kind of percent savings is that typically? Is that 10, 20, 30?
It could be up to 20, on the spread. It could be 25, 30%, even higher. I look at things as a spread, Doug, so I've actually took a spread and halved it. So you can say I chopped their cost by 1/2, but I would say mostly we're chopping down 20, 30% on a lot of our engagements.
Okay. Which fits right in, Doug, with, I believe Strategic Source has said that, right? The average dealer is spending 25 to 30% more than they need to on their indirect expenses, right?
Research, the Aberdeen Group says that if you centralize procurement and the purchasing activities, you'll pull 25% out. We're right between 25 and 27%. Sounds like you guys are in the same spot. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I would say, Doug, remember those poll questions? The longer it says I don't remember, then I would say we get over 20, 30% savings. I think now you're getting into 40, 50% savings.
Oh.
That makes, yeah.
The last comment I would make is, we've been in this space a long time with dealers, and for precisely that reason, Scott, when somebody hasn't quoted their supplier, their partner, that strong relationship for a while, going back to the Reagan comment, trust but verify. but when you do that, when you do take that out for quote, you can now put a value on that relationship, right? Is that spread $60,000 or is that $200,000? And then you can answer the question: is that relationship really worth that? And so I would encourage the listeners to think about this and take it seriously, because there's some big opportunities. Go ahead and wrap it up, guys.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. We are on essentially our last slide here. Unless there's more time, we can certainly entertain more questions. But
actually, Scott, I just wanted to touch back on the how do we get paid. I don't know if that we fully answered that. So it's primarily just on the timing of it. Scott said we cap it at the first year savings, but it's a success fee based model. So we basically get our fee when you get your savings. So at the closing table, we would we would typically get the success fee at that point. So our offer is free, but basically apart from maybe a nominal fee just to put together the marketing materials, it's no cost to the dealer up until the closing and the dealer starts actually realizing those savings.
Correct. And to be clear, we take first year savings, right? A percentage of your savings, not ongoing. Okay, so to wrap this up, you can see our contact information there. I encourage everybody to take a picture of their iPhone, screenshot, whatever. Brian and I are always available, even if you want to talk about some other services that we provide or just want to talk shop. But Brian and I love talking about the industry. So everybody, thanks for your time today. I know everybody's busy, and reach out and let's explore opportunities. Thank you, Doug, too, by the way, and our friends from Strategic Source that put this together for us.
Thank you, Brian and Scott. We appreciate it. We have done, as Chuck mentioned earlier, probably 70 sessions so far on the Profit Improvement webinar series. This is the first time we've ever done one on treasury and finance. And wow, what a lot of very good information. So we appreciate all the time that you guys put into this, and hopefully our listeners will reach out and contact you. We will have a copy of this webinar on our website tomorrow. We will be sending this out to our clients, the link to this webinar sometime soon with contact information. But if you're interested in this deck, certainly scan that QR code and we make sure you get a copy of this right away. So, one of the questions we've been talking about today, we know the dealers are in kind of cash crunch right now, that revenues aren't great. Most dealers are overspending by 25%. I think that was just validated here by Scott and Brian. But if you're concerned about your dealerships, we don't have deep experience in floor plan and finance products. That's why we brought these gentlemen on. But we do have experience in about 150 other expense categories. We know that dealers will use about 100 expense categories a year. We know that they'll typically spend 5% of sales. And of that 5% that they spend, they're typically spending 25% too much. They have too many suppliers, and the opportunity is really quite strong to reduce costs and improve profitability. Again, dealers have a huge number of categories to spend money in legitimately, but they tend to approach that very tactically in a firefighting mode. Dealers are short-staffed. They have no plan typically. So, there's too many suppliers, too many invoices, and too few discounts and rebates out there. One of the things that we do is help the dealer understand what their spend is, what the opportunity is, not only on an annual basis, but a monthly basis. And keep in mind that none of these savings occur until we go through an analysis. We put some alternatives in front of you. You make a decision, and then we implement. And like Brian and Scott, we also go back and audit to make sure that everything that the dealer promised us or the supplier promised us rather, is what we're receiving on the other end. That audit function is critical. Expense category scope is quite broad, as I alluded to. There's about 72 general expense categories. There's about 15 to 16 facility categories, and there's another 56 automotive categories to manage. So just think of that in terms of time. If you're that CFO trying to do all this yourself, in addition to closing the books and dealing with auditors and everything else, you're time constrained. We understand that, and we take that off your plate. So some of the solutions that we provide include the Profit Improvement Program, where this is a turnkey solution. We will do everything from the analysis to planning to sourcing. We'll implement, we'll audit, and we'll manage. The next option that we've got is simply a strategic spend analysis. We can go into your spend, understand what you're spending by expense category, and leave you with a plan. If the analogy here is kind of the Home Depot do-it-yourself. We can put the plan together, and then you can execute it on your own if that's what you choose to do. The other thing that we have that's very valuable, clients like this, is a contract tracker. We try to flesh out the contracts that you have, the agreements, the pricing agreements that you have. We get those digitized, and we manage that for you. We have a spend management suite that combines contract tracker, coaching, Expense Edge, which is a digital platform with benchmarks. We can provide that to you as well. And this is Expense Edge. We can deliver that to you separately, where, again, if you want to go out and negotiate with your suppliers, you really need to know what the market is doing in uniforms or office supplies or credit bureau or credit card. We can provide that data to you on a subscription basis. Spend management learning is something I'm involved in knee deep. We developed this about 2 years ago, where we can teach your team to do what we do. I am revising this coursework right now, and so if you have an appetite to learn and take this on yourself, we can help you with that as well. Again, if you want a copy of this webinar presentation, scan this QR code. Brian and Scott, thank you so much. David, thank you. And Chuck, thanks for your contributions as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Doug. And thanks, everyone, for attending. We're going to bring up a post-session survey. You spent an hour with us. We'd love to get your feedback on it. Just 2 questions for you. So once again, thanks, everyone, for your time today. And we look forward to you joining us on future Profit Improvement Series webinars with Strategic Source. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. And we look forward to you joining us next time.